Hello, and thanks for joining our webinar. I am Randy Sainer, a Beef Systems Extension Educator at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, based in North Platte. Today is a part of our Center for Agricultural Profitability's weekly webinar series, which usually happens every Thursday at noon Central. Check out the full schedule on the website at cap.unl.edu. Hay production has been reported to be 50% of average or less in many areas of Nebraska and the U.S. Hay supply is at a 50-year low. Couple this information with rising costs and it becomes important to plan fall, winter, and next spring's hay needs sooner rather than later. This webinar will cover the importance of inventorying our feed and hay resources now to know what you need and describe how checking prices and availability now will go a long way to reducing the anxiety of what we will feed our cows this fall and winter. Joining me to present are two of my fellow beef systems educators with Nebraska Extension. TL Meyer is based in Thetford and joins us today. Hi, TL.
Hello.
And Alfredo DiConzo is based out of West Point. Thanks for being here, Alfredo.
Okay, well, I'll get us started. I believe Randy and I, along with Ryan Benjamin, were back here in April talking about drought, and we showed a lot of drought monitor maps, which I'm going to do here shortly. Then July came around and started seeing and hearing lots of reports that hay production was low. I'm up here in the Sandhills. It was kind of hit or miss, but just didn't see a lot of hay bales out on the meadows. So if we look back 10 years ago at this time, we were pretty darn dry in this part of the world. But we started, as we were preparing this presentation, we got to looking at just back in 2020 at this time, how the Western United States was pretty dry as we were. And we go up to next year, Western United States had gotten considerably worse. We were still dry. I think everyone remembers we had a pretty dry, warm winter for the most part. And then if we look at the drought monitor that came out this week, the Western United States has seen some relief, but that drought has shifted into our area and further south again, which leads us to poor range and pasture condition. Randy?
Yeah, so if you look at the U.S., you know we have over 40% of the land in the U.S. is rated poor or very poor as far as soil moisture. And the Western region is actually improved. As you can see, it's actually below average now, which last year it was way above average for poor soil moisture. So it's improved, but we go to the next one, Great Plains, and look at the Great Plains. It is really increased as far as soil and soil moisture. And you can see last year we weren't really good either, but you can see over 55%, around 55% of Nebraska's soils are rated poor to very poor. We also look at the southern United States. You know, they've improved a little bit. You can see that graph has went down, but they're still very dry also. If we look at the top states for hay production, these are the top 10. You know, of course, Texas is down. So is Missouri is down. Nebraska, and we can look at Nebraska and even Texas. They started off in 2021 pretty good. As of May, they were up, but due to the drought, people have had to feed hay during the summer, and so now we are actually below what we were a few years ago. So there's not a lot of hay in those three states. If we look at Kansas, it's the same way. Kansas is down. They were down last 2021, but also they're down this year at 18%. So where do you find hay? You know, California has a little bit extra hay, but that's a long ways. Oklahoma is down also. So you can see that high plains and southern plains is still pretty dry. Montana, as you can see, has improved. It was very bad last year, but it has improved this year. But the state that really has improved and has quite a bit of hay, and I've known people that start buying hay from it in South Dakota, and that's our neighboring state north of us from Nebraska. So that's a state, if you can't find it in Nebraska, that might be a good place to look at. If we look at the other states that have high hay production, Kentucky and the others, Kentucky is low. Idaho is better, but of course it's a long way, so we're not going to be hauling hay in from Idaho. But again, the total U.S. is down. So if we look at hay price, go ahead. We look at hay price, that's fine. Alfalfa hay, you can see that direct line is up and it's above last year. You know, around that almost a 280 a ton for alfalfa hay, and so it's going to be high cost for hay. Other hay, again, look at a large increase, also almost over 170, so or almost to 170 a ton in some cases. So you can see that hay prices are increasing and probably will continue as we try to get the hay for this winter. And also, so what are alternatives? We'll look at corn prices. Corn prices are up also this year. So feed cost for beef producers is going to be higher. There's just no doubt. All of our alternatives are going to be higher also.
So how do we go about finding hay? Or if we do have some hay to sell, how do we go about pricing it? And the first thing we encourage you to look at is the Nebraska Direct Hay Report. It comes out every Thursday. In fact, it might be getting updated while we're on this webinar. But that reports current Nebraska hay prices by region. If you want to see other states such as South Dakota, as Randy mentioned, you can go to the USDA Market News Hay Reports, and we'll try and get these links shared in the chat during this presentation. Also, you can visit the Nebraska Department of Agriculture has a hay and forage hotline, and it is online as well as the number listed on your screen. This is a free listing for both buyers and sellers. And then, of course, there's always local and regional resources. There seems to be quite a bit of hay discussion on social media as well. So use your resources. Yeah, that's our recommendation there. This was the hay report last week. As you look to the screen, if you go about to the middle of the screen, it looked like prairie hay at good quality, which is 9 to 13% crude protein, was being sold at about $200 per ton for large round bales. So with that in mind, let's talk more, Randy, about how to price hay.
So when you're buying hay, I always like to buy it by the weight or per ton instead of per bale, because bales can range anywhere from 1,200 pounds to 1,500 pounds. And so, you know, at least when you weigh it, you know you're getting what you bought. And then the other thing is know your quality. If they've got it, it'd be great if they have a hay test. It always helps you so you can look at your quality. Plus, it'll help you with rations. And so know that quality. And then the quality is going to be important, and you know what we're feeding too. If we're feeding cows that are lactating or young calves, the quality needs to be higher than if we have gestating cows, which require a lower protein and energy. And so we want to also aim getting tightly rolled bales. You don't want ones that are falling apart, so you're losing hay as it's coming into your yards. Dense bales that have square shoulders, those kind of things that avoids losses when we're feeding the hay also. And then net wrap, if they've been net wrapped, it's going to help shed water. So if it does, you do get a lot of moisture, it just kind of helps keep that bale dry. And then we want them free of mold, weed seed, and dangerous levels of nitrates. Nitrates are especially important in sorghum Sudan, those kind of things, even in corn stalks this year because of the drought, dryland corn stalks. So you always want to have that tested or make sure they have a test on it when you buy it. So what are you feeding the hay to is going to be really important in what you buy. You know, higher quality hay for those calves and those lactating cows means you're going to have to feed less additional supplement for both protein and energy. But if you can't find the good quality, then you're going to have to just buy more protein and supplement, which is going to increase your cost. So try to buy those bales that match the cow's requirements or the calf's requirements when you're buying hay. A little more expensive hay at times may be better than a cheaper hay if the quality is very, very low. And the way you tell that is with a lab analysis, and you can get a lab analysis starting at $18. Basically, we want to make sure we get dry matter, crude protein, and TDN. That would be the minimum things, and especially nitrates if you're using some of these forages that are high in nitrates. The other thing we can get is mineral content and relative feeding value. That's good if you have it, but it's not as important as making sure you have those others, because that's what you're going to determine when you do a ration.
So once you do get hay purchased, just a reminder, make sure we're putting it, if we must store it, ideally we would store it inside. That's not feasible for most of us. So make sure it's in a well-drained area out in the open, easy to get to in the winter. We suggest you line up your rows north to south, at least 3 feet apart. This allows for snow runoff to melt. And then make sure you weigh those bales with a scale and get accurate weights. So when you're planning your feeding, you can accurately use that hay to meet your feeding needs. Also remember, if the hay contains noxious or invasive weeds or non-native forage species, you want to feed that in a limited area so that you can hopefully control any growth of those invasive species. And then just, we want to reiterate today, get your hay purchased now, or at least get your feeding alternatives planned, just to get through this spring, winter and spring before grass growth. These are some resources. Again, we mentioned earlier the Nebraska Direct Hay Report, USDA Market News Hay Reports, the Department of Ag's Hay and Forage Hotline. Again, the number is there on the screen, or it can be found online. And then, as we talked about sampling hay, some resources available at beef.unl.edu for sampling and storing hay. Please visit our website. And now, as Randy and I finish up, we'll turn it over to Alfredo D. Costanzo to talk more about alternatives if hay isn't your only option.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not taking a little struggle getting this thing going. I'm assuming everybody can see that TL, my screen. And thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. Great discussion so far on how we look at hay purchases for this winter. It's going to be a tough winter, as you all know, because of the prices as they have been indicated, and prices follow the lack of rain and forage growth out there. So my role today is to have you think a little bit about alternatives to feeding hay. The question out there a lot, particularly these days, is can I be doing something different other than hay to meet the energy needs of cattle? And maybe before I say much more, I'm going to concentrate heavily on energy only, because we're considering that most of the hay we're going to purchase and look at for winter and early spring has more to do with maintaining cows than perhaps making cattle grow, where we might require greater proportions of protein. But when it comes time to talking about the questions and so forth, we can direct attention to fulfilling protein needs of beef cattle, particularly growing cattle. So what I'm going to try to do early on, and I don't want to lose you on this part of the discussion, because I think it gives us a very relevant start point to be able to price feeds based on the value of corn grain. And once again, most of the feeds we purchase every day are based on an energy basis, and that energy basis is going to be corn grain price. If we were purchasing distillers, perhaps not even distillers, canola meal, for example, a protein source, we would be looking at soybean meal as the reference price. So let's concentrate on energy right now and talk about an average that I see out there currently. I could be off 50 cents depending on where you're at. The corn grain price at $7 a bushel. So consider that the example. If we transform just simply by dividing 7 by 56 and multiplying that by 2,000, we end up with a corn grain price of $250 per ton. It's the same corn, just priced on a different unit, dollars per ton versus dollars per bushel. If we ratio one value to the other, that ratio comes out to about 35.8. Let's round it down to 35 for the rest of this discussion. And why am I doing that? Because anything we buy, including hay, corn silage from your neighbor's pile, molasses, if you can do that, gluten feed, anything you're going to buy for the purpose of energy supply needs to ratio at 35:1 to corn to be considered a good optional alternative price. And so if we look, for example, at distiller's grains, dry distiller's grains, and the quote comes in at $260 per ton at the local ethanol plant, we divide 260 by $7 to the bushel of corn price, and the ratio is 37.1. The point is that that value is greater than the 35, and therefore it may say that distiller's grains in this example is not a good option relative to corn. The one difference is that distiller's grains also carries protein, but for the sake of energy discussion, that ratio needs to be 35:1 to appraise itself as good as corn, or better if that value drops below 35. So pretty soon you may ask yourself the question, what happens when we look at wet feeds such as wet distiller's grains or modified wet distiller's grains, each of them with 30% or 50% dry matter? So if we multiply that value 35 or 36 on this example by 0.3, it gives us a new factor of 11, or that factor could also be 18. And I'm trying to point to that with the arrow on the screen. So again, if we're looking at purchasing wet distiller's grains with 30% dry matter, we multiply the price of corn at $7 a bushel. If that's the going rate times 11, it says we can pay up to $77 a ton for wet distiller's grains. If we do that multiplication, instead 7 times 18 is going to get us closer to a value of $135 a ton. Now, what I have done so far is just simply modify the moisture content of the feed in question relative to corn, with the assumption that corn is a relatively dry product at about 12% moisture. But if we're trying to purchase something wetter, such as distiller's grains, the wet or modified wet form, then we need to modify that fraction. Instead of being 36, is down in the range of 10 for wetter feeds and 18 to 20 for feeds of moderate moisture content. If, on the other hand, you're trying to appraise oats or barley or wheat or screenings or any other small grain, in this case, milo, as it is on the slide, a milo contains 84% TDN or energy. If we ratio that number to the 88% concentration of energy in corn, it tells us that the proportion of energy in milo relative to corn is 95%. So we now multiply 36 by 95 to get a new value. Instead of 36 is going to be 34. And we now multiply that by 7. The formula tells us that the most we can pay for milo seed is going to be 230, and then milo grain, $238 a ton. A recent quote has milo grain priced at $243. That says we pass that alternative up and move on to whatever else is possibly available. So summarizing on these discussions of what those factors should be, I have grouped them into two broad categories. These are feeds that tend to be very dry, as you can see here for the dry matter content, and something such as a bread co-product, which I'm not sure where anybody could find that unless they're close to a urban center. That number comes out very close to the value of 35 we have been talking about, including even soy hulls at about 33. Soy hulls could become a possibility for some of you out there. Screenings typically will sell for a value very similar to that of corn grain. You can see here for barley and wheat, very, very close to that value that we have been talking about. So again, this factor is a multiplier to the price of corn on a dollar per bushel basis to give us a grand total of what we should be able to pay dollars per ton for any of these particular feeds on the upper level. Going back to the more wetter feeds, you can see here for corn silage, if I'm putting up corn, and you can do this if you are going to be putting up corn silage, or you already did perhaps this year, the appropriate price for that silage should be 12 times the price of corn on a dollar per bushel basis, which happens to be $84 a ton. So as you can tell, pretty expensive feeds as we're looking at. And this is a reference factor for some of the other feeds as we have talked about. Interesting that TL brought up this same picture of the prices of hay in Nebraska. So I'm bringing them in for a reference price so we can look at an alternative to hay going forward. So again, if we're looking at corn at $7 a bushel or $250 a ton, and hay in the range of $200 to $300 a ton based on the information from USDA, each of the energy content of corn and hay is listed here at 88% versus 53%. And we're going to appraise, for the sake of this example, hay at $200 a ton. So then simply we go 53 divided by 88 gives us a relative energy value of hay relative to corn of 60%. If we start with that 35 unit that we've been using, multiplied by 0.6, it gives us a factor of 21, which if then we multiply 7 times 21, it'll give us a number of $147 a ton to pay for hay. In other words, hay becomes the same price as corn in this market if it drops to nearly $150 a ton. So if you can find hay for that price, jump on it, because it'll be equivalent to the example I'm going to show on maybe sparing some hay, using more corn, and getting us there for feeding cows this winter. Other differences between hay and corn, for example, would be that the bulk in hay is less, leads to less weight per load. Let's keep this in mind with fuel prices being as high as they are. Diesel at $5 a gallon, any tractor hour pretty much, or any equipment hour running on diesel will consume 4 gallons per hour. So that's going to be $20 per hour of fuel costs. So we're feeding from 20 to 100 cows, that value on a per hour basis, if that's what it's going to take us to feed cows, 20, 60, or 100 will go from $1 to 20 cents per cow. So thinking about this, a yardage at a feedlot will cost anywhere from 45 to 55 cents per head. What we're saying here, a yardage for feeding cows just for fuel alone will cost us from 20 cents to $1 per cow going into this winter. So we have to make every trip count. And maybe this is the year to make larger groups to feed cows out there, because that may help us spread the cost of fuel over more cows. The other problem, or the other challenge that hay brings us, is waste. At the lowest end, we'll have 10% waste. At the highest end, we can have 30% waste. So pretty soon, $200 a ton hay becomes $260 a ton hay, because 30% of that hay ended up on the ground. So consider this alternative, and this, I have to say, you need to do with some caution, because we're not used to feeding corn to our cows. So the proposal on this slide is to say that we could meet a requirement of a cow, for example, of 15 pounds per day for TDN. If we use hay at 53% TDN, then that cow will require 28 pounds a day. If we assume the lowest possible waste, that will bring that up to 2.8 pounds. So adding them together gives us roughly about 31 pounds needed per cow. If we multiply that by the $200 per ton, that will give us $3.62 per cow. If instead we make a decision to take 75% of the 15 pounds as corn and the other 25% as hay, we will need 13 pounds of corn and 7 pounds of hay. We add the respective waste, perhaps 3% on corn. I hope it's not even that high. And on hay, we'll still probably lose 10%, likely less, because these cows are going to be hungry, looking for bulk after consuming only 13 pounds of corn. Hopefully this number can get down to 0. When we add those two values together, that total is $2.80 per cow, a savings of 83 cents per cow, or 23%. More importantly, there's a reduction in hay needs of 75%, which may fit better with the supply of hay that we might have going forward. It is an important thing to consider. If you choose to purchase either hay or corn, the question is, how are we going to protect it while we store it, we transfer it from point A to point B, or any potential predator losses? So let's keep this slide in mind. By the way, this is a picture of silage pile that was not protected, and you can see weeds growing on top of this pile, poorly managed on the front as well. Obviously, this picture was not taken in Nebraska. And so this arrow will indicate the direction of losses, with moist feeds probably having the greatest potential losses, and dry fine particle size feeds having the least amount of losses. So corn grain would be in this category, hay would be somewhere in this category, and then silages and other items such as that would be more in this category. So when we make a decision to be here on this end or here on this end, we should keep in mind that losses can contribute to adding to costs this year. This is a brief observation on what those potential losses are. You can see what I've indicated already, that some of these products that are high moisture, such as wet brewers grains, losses can reach 30%. Hopefully dry rolled corn is down in the 30%, I'm sorry, 3% as I had indicated. Corn screenings could be perhaps 15%, and corn silage, if we do things right, it'll probably be at 12%. So with that, I'm gonna stop so we can turn over to questions, and I appreciate the time to visit with you. Thank you.
Alfredo, we have a question for you. Do handling cost and waste need to be taken into account with the price reference ratios compared to corn? Any rules of thumb for the various feeds, or are they similar enough to not worry over? Did you get that?
No, excellent question. I will repeat it. Do the ratio factors that I have indicated take into consideration some of the extra possibilities transferred to, from FOB to on the farm, et cetera, et cetera? The answer is they do not. So 35, the value of 35 should really reflect what the price of that commodity is as the animal is ready to consume it. So if we have distillers grains at $145 a ton for modified wet and corn at $7, maybe that ratio is already gone over that number that we wanted and it's out of the question. But if that number is 135 and we expect the same amount of shrinkage on both the corn grain as we do on the distillers, then it becomes sort of a moot point at that point.
All right, looks gentlemen like we have another question. Do you think Nebraska cattle producers will or already called some of their cattle to limit how much expensive feed they would have to purchase, which is in short supply? Is this a better route to go for some? Not sure if I read that clearly. Russ,
TL, if you want me to jump in on that, or
Please do.
whoever, Randy.
Yeah, go ahead, Alfredo. I was looking at the question.
The question refers to have producers maybe already modify the inventory so they could handle fewer cattle or cows on feed this winter. And yes, there has been, in my opinion, Randy and TL, you can correct me if I'm wrong, an exodus of cows already from the area. And on some calculations I have done before, it really, if you need to get rid of cattle, this is probably the time to do it because cow prices were still very good. Cash in on that, bring some of that cash in and use it to buy what you need to take care of the ones that are left behind. On following up on that simulation, what you have left for inventory will be sufficient. Hopefully feeder prices continue to go up. So between the money earned from selling cull cows or to some fortunate individual that has reigned somewhere else, eastern part of the country, and you could sell them as breeding cows, more power to you. But the point being is, once you straighten that out, you should be in way better shape to face both the drought and the possibility of better feeder prices in the future.
Yeah, yes, and there's a reminder on here. For those buying sorghum hay, and I said this earlier, or grazing sorghum, make sure to have it tested for prussic acid also, especially if you get a freeze on it. You can get prussic acid poisoning very, very easily. And I didn't say that, I said nitrates. Nitrates are very important too. And watch after a freeze for both those, because they can bring their ugly head up and you can lose a cow over it. So just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. And for Alfredo, I think you're right. I think we did see an exodus of cows even this spring. We had high numbers sell, and people were selling cows that were going to calve late. And those that did that probably had more grass this fall. But most of our pastures are pretty low. So those open cows this year just aren't going to pay their way, and the cost of feed is going to be really rough on you. So get rid of those as soon as possible so you have them off feed. But it looks like calf prices could be better this next year. And actually calves that have sold early this year have sold pretty high prices. So it looks promising for the future, put it that way, if we can get through these high feed costs this year.
That is correct, and I would encourage people to watch those prices. Obviously, we're just getting into the good part of cattle prices, but as it turns the other way, which crystal balls say anywhere after 2024, and those feeder prices soften, maybe it's time to consider selling another group of cows to not have such high costs and low income.
I just agree with everything you guys said.
Exactly, and I'm looking for some more questions. I don't see any more at this time. We would like you to go ahead and don't forget to take our survey. It helps us know what people want to hear and what they're interested in. So if you get a chance, please take a survey before you get off. If we have a little time left, is there any further questions for anyone on? If not, we'll close this down here in a little bit.
So maybe Randy, any strategies and TL strategies that you have seen already being utilized out there to manage low hay supplies and things, in addition to culling cows, and anything you might just consider sharing?
I have a lot of range and cake guys that I saw some producers last year go to corn stalks for the first time because of hay prices last year, because they had gotten hay historically out of South Dakota and that wasn't available last year. This year though, some of them are going to continue to go back to corn stalks, but have been able to get that hay bought out of South Dakota. My location, that's a good spot for us to look for hay up here.
I would say the same thing, you know, corn stalks, everybody's looking at corn stalks. In fact, we have people already out on corn stalks. Again, watch the nitrate levels. You gotta be really careful. And remember that when we figure your rate to put in, your stocking rate, if the yield is down, which we expect this year is gonna be lower, that means you're gonna have less leaves and husk out there, which means it's not gonna last you as long. So you might have to have more acreage, and people need to think about that. Otherwise, you're going to have to bring your cows home sooner. If you leave them on there, what's going to happen is their conditions going to go down, and you could have some issues at calving. So just some things to think about.
I see Shonda made a comment here, and I think we'd all agree with that. She was told by her vet to remove cattle from sorghum for 7 to 10 days when it freezes to avoid poisonings. This we would agree with.
Yeah, that would be
Go ahead, Randy.
correct. Yeah, that would be what the vets would recommend, and that's what we would recommend too. If you get a freeze, get them out of there and give it time for that prussic acid and nitrate to go down after the freeze. Because stressing a plant causes the nitrates, and it can cause prussic acid in those sorghums.
And I think that's another important thing is cattle are very valuable now. So preventing any illness, whether it's backgrounding cattle, cows in the winter, or feedlot cattle, is a very high priority. We may tend to feel a little bit like pushed and pressured because of input costs, but cutting corners on the veterinary side is probably not the alternative that will help us. If anything, keep them alive and healthy so they can produce what they're there for.
The other thing we're seeing too, Alfredo, is people are weaning earlier, getting those calves off those cows. It saves almost a half a day of grazing by doing that. And so the sooner you get those calves off of there so they're not eating that extra grass, if you have any extra, put it that way, the better off you are.
And you can turn to stocks a lot faster.
Yep. And we're seeing cows out on stocks already, and some of the high moisture corn's out.
Right.
Yeah, weaning's a great way to use as a supplement strategy, keeping the body condition on your cows. So.
And kind of some of the weather outlook looks like it could be a cold winter. So cows going into a cold winter with better condition, they're going to do better. And so you kind of need to watch that.
TL, what did it say on those climate maps for precipitation? Do you remember?
I don't believe it was above average.
I sort of thought that you might say that. I have not seen any positive outlook for precipitation, which I'm used to a November that's rainy once following a drought to sort of indications that it'll break, but I didn't see that. Now, it is a tough thing for the people in Florida, but if that brings rains to this area, it may have been not in vain.
And now, honestly, they're saying it's going to be pretty warm through the fall, warm and dry. which is not bad for corn stalks if you think about it. But
True.
if we do hit cold weather in January, or December, like they're talking, that'll change things pretty fast. So hopefully that hurricane will send some rain, but it looks like it's going to send it to the East Coast instead.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Climate Prediction Center for the next 3 months, we're below average on precip and above average on temperature. So I'm guessing a similar fall to last year.
So
Yeah.
remember, if you want to get drought insurance for next year, it's got to be done in December with your local FSA. So if you're thinking about that, and if we don't know what next year's going to do, there's another option for you to help you pay for hay.
Yes, and
Good
if you've
idea.
been in the drought monitor categories, Randy, you're gonna have to clarify for me on this, but if you've been in D2, D3 on the drought monitor for up to, I don't remember how long. Jay, I see you're on here. You might chime in. There is some relief there available as well. Again, check with your local FSA office on those programs.
And Jay did say December 1st. So make sure if you're looking at PRF insurance, you need to decide by December 1st. It's always a challenge, but the way things been the last few years, that stuff has helped a lot of producers pay for some extra hay. So don't know about next year, but it's just one of those things you need to decide by December 1st. And you're right, TL, there is some benefit there.
I see Shonda chimed in from the Heard That conference. Yep, Shaylee was not optimistic for precipitation this winter.
Well, if we have no more questions, we will go ahead and probably finish this. So I have a few announcements. We want to thank everyone for joining. If you have questions, go ahead and send them in, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of end this. Thank you everyone for joining us today. A recording of the webinar will be posted at the cap.unl.edu website, where you can also register for other upcoming webinars. Next Thursday, we'll be looking at a new report just released that offers a picture of the current farm income situation and outlook for Nebraska. Please click the link in the chat box here to take a brief summary to provide feedback on this webinar and inform our upcoming sessions. There is in the chat box, Jay did put on the page you can go to for LFP, for livestock forage protection. So you can get on there and look at that. We want to thank you again for joining us, and we will be saying goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.